We're never short on college football news these days, especially at LSU. My goodness, what a season they've had. They made it through at 6-7, worst season since 1999, but that's all in the books and headed toward 2022 with Brian Kelly. We got Matt Mascona on the line. After further review is his show, ESPN Baton Rouge, New Orleans. Matt, how you doing, man?
Mark, I'm doing great, man. Happy New Year. I guess it's the 14th or 15th, but I guess we can still say Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Haven't talked to you. It's been a long time. Good to see you. Glad to have you
as
here.
Well.
I got to hit you up, even though it's been a while, and because of the news cycle being so fast and furious, this seems probably like it was 6 months ago for you that Brian Kelly was hired. But that whole thing and the way it went down, we had a situation where I cannot think in college football history where a coach had gone voluntarily from blue blood to blue blood. And we had that with two guys in the span of like 3 days with Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
So how surprised were you, for being a guy that's in the know and as close to the program as anybody? How surprised were you?
Well, the only other one that I remember too was, if you remember, when Dennis Franchione left Alabama for Texas A&M. That's been about 20 years or so, but you're right. It's rare. I mean, it is really rare for that to happen. Mark, early in the process, I heard Brian Kelly's name, and as a matter of fact, LSU's five-star quarterback signee, Walker Howard, the only other school that he visited was Notre Dame. And you might remember Walker's dad, Jamie Howard, who played at LSU in the 90s. I know Jamie pretty well, and Jamie came on the show, and he said point blank that when he was up in South Bend, when they went late October for a visit, he asked Brian Kelly point blank, "Are you considering the LSU job?" And Brian Kelly told him, "Well, they called, and I thought about it and vetted a little bit, but I'm staying here." So actually, to the point, in October, we kind of knew that LSU had made contact. There was interest in Brian Kelly. The fact that they kept it quiet until they got across the finish line was very surprising, though. And I think it was well played by Scott Woodward, who, his MO as an athletic director is going big game hunting. He hired Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. He went and got Chris Peterson out of Boise, got him to the University of Washington. Hired Kim Mulkey at LSU. I mean, he does not aim small, and we all knew that he was going to aim big with this hire, and I think he landed a big fish. The winningest active coach in college football, who really just has one box left to check on his resume, and that's to win a national championship.
Now, Matt, I'm not even going to venture to go into the whole debacle concerning the video that went viral and in the Southern drawl and all of that. Even before that, it just struck me, and I was not alone, as an interesting, we'll say, cultural fit. Brian Kelly, LSU.
Well, Ed Ogeron would have been a perfect cultural fit, and he was a disaster. Johnny Jones was a perfect fit at LSU as a basketball coach, and he was a disaster. I'll tell you, the three winningest coaches in the history of LSU athletics are Skip Ertman, who is a Jewish man from Detroit, who was born in Detroit, grew up in Miami, and came to heavily Roman Catholic South Louisiana, won 5 baseball national titles, still lives here. Dale Brown, who's from Minot, North Dakota, who is the second winningest coach behind Adolph Rupp in the history of SEC basketball. He still lives here. And then Nick Saban, who's born in West Virginia and a Midwesterner. It doesn't matter if you're from here, man. It doesn't. It's an overplayed storyline. If you win, people here will embrace you, as is the case in most places. And Brian Kelly's been a winner everywhere he's been. And the thing he's done that I think is pretty self-aware, because look, he uprooted everything within this program. I mean, excuse me, the on-field, not just the on-field staff, but support staff, analysts, recruiting staff, all the way down to the people that answer the phones in football ops, Mark. I mean, they uprooted everything. But what he has done is been self-aware enough to know that in this state, for recruiting purposes, you have to have people that are respected within the high school coaching community to open doors. And the thing he did immediately was address that with his staff. And it's no coincidence. I'm sure we'll talk about the transfers that LSU's landed, but all 7 5 of the 7 that LSU has landed have been guys that played high school football in Louisiana or were playing college football in Louisiana. and transferred into LSU now. Because it does matter here. And he's self-aware enough to know that. And he brought people onto the staff who sort of filled that gap where he was maybe deficient.
So we see player personnel acquisitions and departures all over the place with every program. So the numbers shouldn't be surprising, especially when there's a coaching transition. But what I'm looking for is more so, is this a response to a bunch of departures? So are guys fleeing the program, which is obviously a bad sign, versus is this Brian Kelly saying, no, recruiting is the lifeblood, but I got to fix it soon. So we are acquiring talent.
So did you happen to watch the Texas Bowl? If you didn't, that's perfectly understandable.
Well,
okay, you did.
I had it on, but I got distracted quite a bit.
Realistically, who's watching 6-6 LSU against Kansas State in the Texas Bowl? I get it. LSU had 38 scholarship players available for that game. 38. Ed Ogeron left this program in ruin, which is stunning that you could go from the heights of 2019 to, in a 2-year period, paying that coach $17 million to go away and playing a bowl game with 38 scholarship players. Mark, they should have never played the game. 38 scholarship players? I mean, you're allowed 85 the last time I checked. They were down to 38. Ed Ogeron was a disaster. He was an unmitigated disaster. There's no way around it. And the more of the sample size grew, the more we learned 2019 was the great outlier. It was magical. It was wonderful. It was marvelous to watch. But he clearly has no idea how that came together and had no idea how to ever get back to anything resembling that. The erosion was rapid and stunning. And he will forever go down with the likes of Gene Chizik and Larry Coker and guys that won championships because of transcendent talent that they had nothing to do with. And he's earned that. Brian Kelly had a choice because, Mark, look at the roster. If you want to compete in the SEC, I mean, you can only sign 25 high school kids. You were at 38 scholarship players. Now, some of those that didn't play were injured and they'll be back on this team. But so hypothetically, you're probably more closer to, say, 50. But you still have 30 some odd scholarship spots available just to field a team that can compete. So your options are you go sign 25 high school kids and you ignore the transfers, or you load up with guys that have played college football and can maybe help ease that transition in. How good they'll be in 2022, Mark. People ask me all the time, hey, what do you think the record's going to be? I don't even know who's going to be on the team. I mean, they've still got – they signed 13 in the early signing period. 13. So they've added now 5 more transfers for 7 total, but they're not even close to done. They got 20 more guys, scholarship guys are going to add to this roster. So what Brian Kelly's doing right now is out of necessity to rebuild a roster that Ed Ogeron left decimated.
So, Matt, based on the guys that you've seen, whether it's on tape or you saw them live or you're just looking at a stat sheet, do you think can contribute immediately that show you something at least based on what they've done elsewhere?
The transfers, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, all of them. They'll all play. I mean, they're all playing, brother. I got news for you. No. Joe Fouché from Arkansas, who is a downhill thumper at safety, he is going to start. Greg Brooks from Arkansas, more of a nickel back. I don't know if he'll start, but he's going to play a ton. Cordell Flott was the nickel this year, who's now gone to the NFL draft. Mark, LSU's got 2 scholarship cornerbacks on the roster. 2. They got 2 scholarship corners. 2. I mean, like, it's stunning. They got to go get cornerbacks. I mean, they were left in ruin. Kyron Lacey, a wide receiver from UL Lafayette, who just committed, big 6'3", 215-pound kid from Thibodeau. LSU's got 6 scholarship wide receivers. You better believe they need numbers there. He's going to play. Miles Frazier, an offensive lineman from FIU. LSU is losing 4 starters on the offensive line. You better believe he's coming in to start. I mean, similar to what Mel Tucker had to do at Michigan State, where he just went and utilized the portal and said, I need to make over my roster immediately. And that's what they're doing. And Mark, I don't think it's going to be like this every year at LSU. I think it's out of necessity right now, but they will build up with high school talent that they can start to grow and develop and groom into the program. But in the immediacy, if they were even hoping to be competitive at all in 2022, he had to go get competent college football players. That's what he's doing. But all the ones you're here, bro. Mark, they went and signed a long snapper from East Carolina. They had to go get a long snapper because the long snapper flunked out of LSU this year. Like they didn't. The week before the bowl game, they were holding at practice, like, who can snap the football? We need someone to be a long snapper in this game. I mean, that's how bad it was. The gross negligence. So, who's going to play? All of them. They're all going to play.
Okay. Well, that covers that. You go from the best cornerback tandem in college football to only 2 cornerbacks on scholarship
Yes.
Pretty quickly. Wow.
Ed Ogeron.
At what point, and that brings up a good, because that was the debate after 2019. How much of this is him? How much of this is just came together? How much is Joe Brady? How much is Joe Burrow being what he is? And obviously we see him now, and we're going to see him later today or tomorrow in the NFL playoffs. And of course, the guy that he throws a lot to as well, Jamar Chase. So at what point did you and others start to think, okay, Ed Ogeron is the same guy he was at Ole Miss in particular, and he can't handle this, versus, no, this guy, we're not going to tout him as an X's and O's genius, but he can run the program.
The day he was hired. I mean, Mark, really? I was one of the most vocal opponents of Ed Ogeron's hiring. Listen, it was not a popular opinion around here. And it was obvious from the start. Hi, Drew. Sorry, I told you my little boy was going to walk in.
Whatever you need to do.
Fine. Look at the first hire he made, Matt Canada. Before the first month of the season in 2017, he was going to the athletic director asking to fire Matt Canada. They were having altercations on the field. He inherited Dave Aranda from Les Miles. Without Dave Aranda, I don't know that Ed Ogeron makes it beyond the first year at LSU. Joe Burrow, transcendent player. Yes, Ed recruited Joe Burrow. But the reason that LSU even had an open door was because Bill Bush was on staff, and Bill Bush had coached with Jimmy Burrow, Joe's dad, at Nebraska. And Joe Burrow was going to Cincinnati. He was going to play for Luke Fickell, who had been at Ohio State. But Bill Bush said to Jimmy, hey, just tell him to come, have him come on a visit. Just come. And to Ed's credit, this is where we'll give him credit, did a marvelous job recruiting Joe and convincing him why playing in the SEC and playing for a national championship was the route to go, and he did. But Bill Bush was on staff because Dave Aranda handpicked him as the 10th assistant. Dave Aranda was on staff because Les Miles hired him. People bring up Joe Brady all the time. I think we've seen what's happened in the NFL. Joe Brady, his role in 2019, sure, he provided some concepts. Mark, Steve Ensminger was the offensive coordinator that year. Steve Ensminger called the plays that year. Joe Brady didn't work with quarterbacks. Steve Ensminger and George Munoz worked with quarterbacks. Joe Brady worked with receivers. Joe Brady gets far too much credit for 2019. It's not to say he didn't have a role. He did. But there's this idea that Joe Brady was the OC and he was the architect of that offense, which just isn't true.
And that's the narrative that's out there, that Joe Brady's the most popular and well-known non-coordinator in college football. After that 2019 season, he was a rock star.
He went, 1 year, and he was with the Carolina Panthers. But Mark, you ask people around the Saints about Joe Brady, and they're like, you mean the guy that was running and getting us coffee? The guy was like cutting up film? I don't want to be completely dismissive of Joe Brady's role. He had a role in bringing some concepts, but the idea that he was the architect of that offense. You know what that offense was, Mark, in 2019? It was Joe Burrow. It was Jamar Chase. It was Justin Jefferson, the two greatest rookie receiving seasons in the history of the NFL. It was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It was Thaddeus Moss. It was three linemen that are all starting in the NFL right now that started as rookies. I mean, that was an NFL team. They were incredible. And a lot of those guys were recruited by the previous staff. And look at what Ed had to do when he had to hire Bo Pelini, Scott Linehan, Jake Peets. I mean, Ed's job's on the line, and he hires Jake Peets. I mean, who had never called plays before. Look, I don't. This doesn't need to be all about Ed Orgeron, but it just, you ask the question, and it's just obvious. Like, he was always the same guy. He never changed what he was at Ole Miss, and I think LSU fans will be forever grateful for 2019 because it was magnificent. And Mark, as an LSU alum, I would take all of the crap that's come along with Ed Orgeron still, because 2019 happened. But it was time to move on, and they couldn't ship him out quickly enough. And they have a winning coach who knows how to develop culture and has won everywhere he's been and built and sustained success and is actually mature and can give coherent answers to questions. I mean, it's been a while since LSU's had that in these parts with a football coach.
Because my evaluation of Ed Orgeron, I'm going to say my initial impression, and it's good to see your son,
Right.
my initial impression and then evaluation, which seemed to be just in line with the initial impression, was this is a lower grade Les Miles. This is a guy that inspires young men. They love to play for him. They'll run through a wall for him. He can run an organization, which obviously that did not come home to roost, while Les Miles could. And I'm even dismissing we'll let things go off the field and just turn a blind eye to a lot of things like that. I'm not even going there, just talking about running a football program. But when it comes to being a tactician or an X's and O's, guys, forget it. But obviously he was even less than Les Miles in that regard.
Les was great at recruiting. Les was great at hiring assistants. Very underrated. Les had one fatal flaw. One. He could not take his hand off the offense. If he had just let his offensive coaches do what they would hire to do, he'd probably still be the coach at LSU. But he couldn't do it. And that was his fatal flaw. He recruited great. He won consistently. He hired great coaches. Hired Corey Raymond, hired Steve Ensminger, hired Ed Orgeron as a defensive line coach recruiting coordinator, which is a great role for Ed. Hired Dave Aranda, hired Kevin Steele. Les was a great evaluator of coaching talent. He couldn't take his hands off the stove offensively.
We got Matt Moscona on the line. It's always a great conversation with him. It's been a long time. After Further reviews his show on ESPN Baton Rouge, New Orleans. The recruiting class right now, as you alluded to, 13 signed. I would assume that there's more work to do, and we're going to see some signees that first Wednesday of February.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of in-state guys that they're looking hard at right now. Trevante Citizen, who's a running who's a running back from Lake Charles. Jacoby Matthews, a five-star safety from Ponchatoula, who that's going to be a heavy SEC battle. That's going to be A&M, Alabama, Florida, and LSU. So we'll see what happens there if Brian Kelly can make some headway with those in-state guys. You know what's going to be interesting too, though, Mark, is of course in this class they're going heavy in the transfer portal, and they're far from done there. But when Brian Kelly was at Notre Dame, he had to recruit nationally. Right. I mean, in the current class that he had recruited, the 23 prospects that he had committed at the time he took the LSU job were from 18 different states. Now, if you're at Notre Dame, you got to get on a plane and fly to go recruit kids. At LSU, you take a drive across the Atchafalaya Basin, 45 minutes, and there's Walker Howard, the number one quarterback in the country. You take a 3-hour drive to Neville, and there's Will Campbell, 5-star number one offensive tackle in the country. You go 5 minutes from LSU's campus, and there's Emory Jones, a 4-star interior offensive lineman from Catholic High. It's the inherent advantage that LSU has that maybe only one or two other schools in college football have, maybe Georgia and Ohio State, are being the only Power Five in a talent-rich state. And with respect to Georgia Tech, but they're just playing a different game than Georgia is. Louisiana per capita puts more kids in the NFL than any other state per capita. It's stunning. I mean, you mentioned Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Those guys played high school football 45 minutes from LSU's campus. And Brian Kelly knows he can tap into that. It's going to be interesting, though, in this class in particular, to see, as he puts the finishing pieces on it, how much of it is the influence he had at Notre Dame recruiting nationally, how much of it is finishing off this class with kids from Louisiana. That's going to be an interesting storyline to watch.
When this transfer portal really started to hum about a year and a half ago, the moves typically made sense. And we'll even isolate it down to the quarterback position where, okay, I can see this guy's got too much competition. He's going to go there. He's got an open spot. Boom. Now it's become like your guess, like, why is he doing this? So Max Johnson leaves. He threw 27 touchdowns with 6 picks, and he leaves an SEC, one of the top 5 programs in the country. Sure, he goes to one of the emerging top 5 programs of the country. I get it to a certain extent. So he leaves. Now Miles Brennan decides to come back,
right?
Which I got to think might be connected to Ed Ogeron's dismissal, or him just seeing, hey, I'm going to be coached by one of the best in the country. So your evaluation on Miles Brennan and what the quarterback job could look like coming up.
Yes, I think Max's departure, while it surprised a lot of people, you say, why would a starting quarterback leave? I think Max Johnson was I don't think he was. He was just very frustrated all season. The offensive operation was a mess. Think of it. He came here and then COVID hits. He comes here after the 2019 season. And then you have the COVID year, which was a disaster. And LSU had a lot of cultural issues internally with the George Floyd racial injustice marches a year ago. I mean, LSU's, look, that was another thing with Ed. I mean, I don't mean to keep going back to Ed, but he handled that very poorly internally, and you had a lot of division in the locker room and among the coaching staff. You have a losing 500 season. You go into 2021, second offensive coordinator in as many years for Max Johnson. The offensive operation was a mess. There were so many times you could see Max Johnson looking to the sideline, hands in the air, saying, "Hurry up! I didn't give me a play." And I can understand why he was frustrated. And then you have a new coach coming in. You don't know who he was going to hire as an OC. I kind of get it from Max Johnson's standpoint. His dad, Brad, played at Florida State. He was very familiar with Jimbo from his time there at Florida State. I didn't like it, obviously, but I get it. Miles Brennan left because he's waited his whole career to be a starter, and it didn't look like it was going to happen here, and he needed to go to a place where he could play. And as soon as Max Johnson left, it opened the door for him to come back. And so Brian Kelly had a conversation with him and said, listen, I need to go get a quarterback. I'm going to get one out of the portal, or you can come back. And so Miles Brennan thought about it for a day and decided he's going to come back. So that would be a great redemption story. And it's so rare in college football that the guys wait their turn now at quarterback. And Miles is one of those guys who did. And when he got his turn, he had 2 really unfortunate injuries. It would be a really great story if he could stay healthy in 2022, start and have a really good year.
If you're into prorating stats, and this is a bit of a stretch, but considering that Joe Burrow had the most prolific touchdown mark in the history of college football with 60, and then Miles Brennan threw 12 in 3 games, so he was on pace for a 15-game season there. Of course, that's a bit of a stretch. By the way,
still with Steve Ensminger as his offensive coordinator.
Okay.
And Joe Brady of the Carolina Panthers. So, but yes, Brennan, they were slinging it, man. And LSU's got receiving talent. And Brennan can sling it. There's no doubt. It's just experience is the question. He's played he started 3 collegiate games. So he's been around a while, but he hasn't started a bunch.
Well, Matt, we've had enough conversations here, and I've seen enough of your work elsewhere to make this statement. You are the viewer here. Going to be hard pressed to find something that's insightful when it comes to just hardcore, just nuts and bolts sports talk, football talk. But then when it becomes important socially and otherwise, insight there, and then funny on top of that and entertaining. So, Matt, where's the best place for anybody outside the earshot of ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, to find your work?
Yeah, if you can spell my name, you can find me pretty much anywhere. I'm on every social media platform. I got a lot of vowels in the last name, but I'm on every social media platform, and our show streams on the 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge YouTube channel. And if you want video or audio at 1045ESPN.com.
Matt, it was great to have you. Happy New Year to you. And we hope things slow down a bit and you can catch your breath.
Thanks, Mark. Always a pleasure, man.